Cool. So welcome everyone. I'm Usama and I'm going to present this work on formal analysis of attested TLS. And since like 1 year, I'm also co-chairing the OpenTRE suite, which is basically doing with all of these trusted execution environments and at the GFO/GH, which I will explain a little bit in the presentation. So the thing is that TLS protocol is one of the most widely used protocols. We all know about it. What this audience might not know a lot is this attestation. Uh, we had already these discussions in HoTSoS 23 and 24, where we presented all the formal analysis for this work. So I'm kind of assuming that to be well known by now. And attested TLS is the way forward that we have done since 24. And it's kind of a combination between attestation combined into TLS protocol. So essentially what I have presented before 2 years back, it's adding TLS protocol into that and providing a complete solution of how I can actually transmit from the server that evidence to the client using a complete protocol. So that's the core idea of what I'm going to talk about. And some developments have happened since then, which is that, namely in the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, which is a standards development organization for Internet Protocol, I assume to be well known here in this audience. The Attested TLS work started in the IETF TLS working group, which is the most natural working group, which is most related to it because we are adding an extension from TLS perspective, the attestation extension to TLS protocol. In that sense, it started over there. The TLS working group has high bar for formal analysis. The FAT process lies in the TLS working group, which means that if there is any non-trivial extension, we need to provide a formal proof for that. So it's embedded in the whole process of becoming an RFC. And that's exactly what we volunteered to do for this specific draft. And we found that there are diversion attacks, meaning that a server could divert, so the attestation, basically that connection between the two could be diverted over to another server. And the client would believe that it's coming from, let's say, server number A, but it could be coming from server B. So that's the whole idea of these diversion attacks. So it was accepted at Asia CCS, and it's a joint work with Mariam and Thomas, and it's all public. So we have also made the formal analysis public, which is in ProVerif, and I will explain a little bit of further to that what we have done afterwards of that. So what we did is, after TLS finding this vulnerability, there was a concern that this is not suitable for centralization at the TLS working group. We defined a new working group that this work is really important for the confidential computing domain to proceed forward and have these guarantees of trusted execution environments. So we, as a proponent, like I and 5 other proponents with me, we defended a seat working group, and that the working group has now been created. And it's the first working group in the history of IETF, to my knowledge, which has formal analysis written down concretely in its charter. Just to make a note here that the TLS working group, though it has a TLS like FAT process, but it's not really in the charter itself. So seat working group is the only first and only working group. Right. So this is the big picture of what has been happening around in the different domains since our last presentation. TLS working group, of course, is responsible for TLS 1.3. You see at the top left that thing. So below that is that RA primitives, which means that the remote attestation primitives, which IETF RATS working group is working on. And on the left, you see IRTF, which is the research, Internet Research Task Force. UFMRG is the Usable Formal Methods Research Group, which is actually doing the research for all of that, which contains basically or subsumes both of the analysis from TLS and attestation. So in addition to that, we also need what is on the right side, like attested TLS, which is not only the two things should be in isolation secure, their composition should also be secure. And it's been proven in the history of different protocols that we have seen that protocols are sometimes, like, the two protocols are secure on their own, but their composition is not secure. And that's exactly what led to the attacks in this case, as I will explain. So Attested TLS on the right side there, as I explained, we created a new working group, seat working group. There is Confidential Computing Consortium, Attestation Special Interest Group, which actually works on all of these things. And I'm leading a couple of projects there for quite some time, like 5, 6 years. We also created a GA4GH Open TRE GIF, which I'm also co-chairing, and also the Linux Plumbers Conference, Attested TLS Micro Conference. We have also proposed. It's still in the process. On the right, also you see IRDF confidential computing. This is also something which I have proposed and is still ongoing. It's not yet in formation. So to give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about, we have the data source on the left. We have infrastructure provider, which is running or doing all the computation happening on that device. And from a remote attestation perspective, the right thing is this attester, the left thing is this verifying line party, the terminology from RFC 9334. And below that, that's from the TLS perspective, meaning that from TLS, the left thing, the data source is basically the TLS client, the right thing, that is the TLS server, acting in that capacity as TLS roles. And attested TLS, as I said, is a combination of both. And what we found in essence or in summary is this vulnerability in all intra-handshake attestation implementations, even though it was like after exhaustive security audit by Trail of Bits, which declared it to be secure after finding all the vulnerabilities, we still using formal methods, we found that vulnerability. And that's really the power of this science of security, namely the formal methods in very particular terms that can actually find vulnerabilities which security audits without using formal methods cannot find. And the CV, as I have listed here, has been published. That's a severity of 7.5, of course, in the category of high. Right. So the idea basically to give you more context on what this intra-handshake means. So I have classified into 3 different categories. So as I said, attested TLS is a combination of attestation and TLS. Attestation has a lot of depth. I can talk about that for hours, but to keep it very compact and concise, it's the signing of the things, which is the cryptographic process. And that really matters at what point in time I'm signing compared to all the other things, like all the other things here, meaning like the TLS handshake, which is shown here. So it's the client hello up till the client finished, which is shown in the slide. And if the signing is happening before that client hello thing was so sent, it's going to be pre-handshake. If it's in between, that's intra-handshake. And if it's afterwards, like after the whole TLS protocol has finished, client finished has been sent, it's been accepted, connection is established now. If we do it at that level, at the application layer potentially, or some shim layer in between, that's the post-handshake thing. And then I have a quick comparison about at a very high level how or what needs to change actually for implementing this. So the intra-handshake needs a change, or actually an invasive change in the TLS protocol. The pre-handshake needs a deployment change because it's happening before. So the CA has to be aware of how actually to verify this evidence. It has to know like what are the things to be checked, how to do that, and all the infrastructure needs to be created for that. And all the 3 actually need the changes at the higher layer. That is the application layer or the shim layer in between those. So that's basically the kind of things that need to change. With that, the motivation for this specific work, as I mentioned, like Confidential Computing Consortium, Attestation Special Interest Group, this project is basically an adopted project of that SIG. And in addition to that, from the IETF perspective, the second motivation was that the area director basically asked us to extensively or exhaustively basically explore all the intra-handshake options because that of the fact that he didn't want to my understanding is that he didn't want actually at that like it to be changed for each and every application. And as I will explain later, like this doesn't need to be or actually in this table I have actually already shown that it's for all the 3 categories. That's common. Something which is redundant is these deployment and protocol changes, which we can absolutely avoid and have better even security that I will explain you. So this was the motivation that we started with. We took all the implementations and we looked at and followed this approach, which is namely TLS 1.3 as a transport protocol, and then agentic AI as the example use case on the left of in the figure, you see left top, like the layered attester and composite attester. So both are in scope. So whether you are talking about Intel TTX, ARM CCA, and all other categories, so all other trusted execution environments, they actually fall in one of the two categories. So we cover exhaustively all the trusted execution environments, build a system model out of that so that we can formally and thoroughly analyze that. And on the left bottom side, so we have agentic AI as the use case. From that, we form the security goals, which are namely we introduce correlation properties. How does a specific evidence correlate with that specific, let's say, key for the purpose of security analysis? And then for any security analysis, we need a threat model. And below that is the binding levels, like I will describe in the next slides, that how strongly does that evidence bind to the TLS connection is the thing that I am interested in. From a security perspective, of course. On the top right now, we have attested TLS protocol. The two main things or the inputs coming to this specific input are, number one, the binding mechanism. What do these implementations use as the binding between the two things, the remote attestation protocol and the TLS protocol? So how they bound together to each other, that's the binding mechanism. And then the second input is practical implementations, like which implementation we are talking about, and to make a formal model out of that, that's the Attested TLS protocol, and forming a modular formal model such that each thing is broken into small modules. We can replace these modules for different implementation. This makes the protocol analysis works easier. Then we do the sorry. So then we do the form analysis, which is to say that we take properties just like any typical process. We take properties, we take model. Model must satisfy the properties. That's the property that we. That's the whole thing we check in the form analysis. And then what we find is that the relay attacks are possible, and we propose these mitigations. And then there is a feedback between this to do it for different protocols. With that approach explained, I want to now talk about the binding mechanisms, one of the inputs that was there in the figure. So we exhaustively looked at what are the possible mechanisms for binding. And the first four are the base mechanisms, which is to say that TLS client nonce can be used. So the client's attestation nonce can be used. Thirdly, there is in the TLS RFC 8446, there is early exporter, which can also be used. And the fourth one, servers public key, can be used for this purpose. The three at the bottom are some possibilities which can be used. And as you can see, it's not exhaustive. The reason is that the attestation nonce, you need it in any case, because otherwise there will be replay attacks. So we have taken the three options which made sense to us, and we would love to hear any thoughts. If there is something missing in this, we will of course analyze that specific option as well. But we really think that this is kind of covering all the interesting data points that we need for the binding mechanisms. So that's one point I have for discussion. Like if someone has any other useful can think of this some binding mechanisms. Of course, multiple combinations are possible from the four base mechanisms. We can surely analyze that, and we believe that this is these seven are kind of covering all the things that are interesting. Within that, mapping it over to the one of the things input coming to the Attested TLS protocol were the implementations, and this is exactly mapping these now to these binding mechanisms. Meta's AI basically uses number one. There is this draft Fossati TLS attestation, which uses number 5, and edgeless systems contrast, Coco's AI, and CCC proof of concept actually use number 6. So we are not aware of any implementation which is outside of the 7 mechanisms that we have defined. So it's exhaustively covering all the implementations that we could come up with. We repeatedly went over to the SEET working group, the TLS working group, and other related working groups which were involved in the research over to check whether we have missed something. So that's all that has come up to date. So I had binding mechanisms as one of the blocks in my block diagram. So this is what it's going to be. The question here of our discussion or for research was that is level 2 sufficient? So we define 3 different levels. That is to say, the property is that if a client has accepted a connection and with the specific evidence with the specific key X, And the server has also accepted a connection with the same evidence and potentially a different key. Why? Then the two keys should be the same. The client's perspective and the server's perspective of the both keys should be the same. Now, what are these keys? We define three different levels of these keys, which is the first level is the GXY, which is shared Diffie-Hellman secret, which captures the handshake state from the GX from the client hello, which the client sends, and GY that the server itself generated. So that's the state of the from the server's perspective. So basically, this table is from server's perspective. That's why I'm saying GY from server and not specifically from server hello. So the second level is HDSE. There is a key in the key schedule of RFC 8446, which is section 7.1. This is the client's handshake traffic key versus the application traffic key, which is the next level. So the handshake traffic key is used to encrypt the handshake traffic. That is the messages which are sent from the client to the server and server to the client. And this contains basically what it contains as a state is the client hello message and the server hello message. And the third one is the client hello up till the server finish. So that's the key which contains all of these. Up to the server finish, the server is fully authenticated at that point in time. So what we prove in this is that the G3, which means that using this ATSC implies G2, which is the HDSC in the above property. Like we keep replacing these X and Y clients and the server's perspective with these three keys. So G3 basically means replace X and Y with the corresponding ATSC views of the server and the client, and so on. And what we prove is basically that G3 implies G2 implies G1. So here is the thing which is kind of explaining why the intra handshake actually fails to do that. So the level 1 is GXY, as I explained. The level 2 is HDSC, and here we argue that basically the KCH, which is shown here, which is derived from the HDSC, is actually used to encrypt the handshake traffic, as you see the finished message from the client up to the server. So the client basically doesn't care about this thing. Even if you, so that's why I write irrelevant for security goals. Even if you remove all the encryption, which is like shown here in this figure, like the small brown things, the KCH, KSH, even if the server and the client do not encrypt these messages, nothing breaks from security. They are for privacy and not for security. The second argument is that at level 2, which is the arrows going downwards, so you see on the right that the authentication step has not even started. So binding it at that level means that basically you are attesting to a server which is not yet authenticated, and that's the whole root of problem. And the third key you see at the bottom is the real key. That's the argument that I make for relevant for security. The client cares about the secret that it will send after establishing the whole TLS connection. And if that secret is not encrypted, if that key somehow leaks, then everything breaks. So that's the key argument that we make here, that this basically needs to be fixed. I have this relay attack, which is showing that the adversary basically relays the evidence over to the server, to the genuine AI agent, and gets the evidence and sends it back. This is the point I was making, like HDSC versus ATSC. And on this slide, I'm showing that the adversary can basically, the attack is that the adversary can relay this evidence over, the genuine AI agent can generate that evidence, send it back, and then adversary can relay as its own evidence. The second attack is basically that the mechanism number 4, which I described, that the public key of the server, if the private key corresponding to that key is leaked, there is another problem that there is no binding to that underlying connection. And that's why the adversary can still do the relay attack in this case. This attack is requires that private key to be leaked, which is still possible using side channel attacks because the adversary is in full control of the whole machine. So the attacks have been acknowledged by Gogo's AI. That's one of the implementations which were used. They use basically attestation nonce and server public key joined together. And this is one of their blogs where they actually acknowledge our formal analysis and the relay attack. The CV has been generated. Its high severity 7.8 is what the Developers ranked it in the database. However, it's 7.5, and it's basically we followed all the responsible disclosures. And the key issue here is binding evidence to unauthenticated pair. As I mentioned in the intra handshake, you don't have that, the authentication part has not even yet started. Finally, there is a need for implementation guidance. I have written a couple of things like SNI basically is intended for the host name. Ageless folks are basically abusing this field for conveyance of the nonce, and the ALPN is basically intended for protocol names, which they shifted over to, but it's still an abuse that's not intended for conveyance of the protocol. So to wrap it up, basically, the summary of where we stand is that the pre-handshake attestation has replay and diversion attacks. Intra-handshake has diversion and relay attacks. I have listed two of the protocols which are affected, and actually like others as well. So we have proved for these two protocols, but like the argument that I made applies to all the intra-handshake proposals. So for post-handshake, there is no known attack to date. And that's one of the drafts that I have for standardization. I'm one of the authors of this draft, draft for post-handshake. And as I described and argued that for the 3 levels, the intra-handshake attestation can only provide up to level 2. And we also argue that basically intra-handshake is adding unnecessary complexity. Like it can be avoided by just using post-handshake, and also was clear from the table that I had. So the work that we are currently doing is on the lines of moving to post-quantum. The hybrid versus pure debates are actually happening everywhere, including the TLS working group. And that's one of the works that we have planned in our research to analyze hybrids more formally and to see like what are the properties that we gain or lose, or what are the kind of the trade-offs and so on in that kind of a design. With that, I have a number of links that you can have a look at, and I want to thank also all of my co-authors, specifically who have been working in all of this work for over several years of this attested TLS work, as well as several contributors who have contributed to all of this work. And I would like to conclude here, and I would love to hear your thoughts or any questions about this. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for the talk. Anyone who has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I guess my first question was, have you thought at all about how like difficult it would be to like kind of roll out this of like a fix to this problem, like what exactly that would look like?
Right. So the fix is what I had in the fix in the last slide, which I had the post-handshake attestation. So the idea there is it's based on RFC 9261. That's the internet draft that I have. And with 5 other authors. The idea is that you do TLS attestation. So you do TLS protocol without any changes, without any TLS protocol level changes. And then you bind it using RFC 9261. You bind that attestation evidence to this channel. That connection, and that basically binds it to the level of level 3. So you achieve level 3 without changing any protocol, without making any TLS protocol level changes. All the formal proofs which were done for TLS protocol remain the same, and you still have that strong binding when the server is authenticated. So the Cocos AI folks have actually implemented it, and we are still like working with them in order to verify that the implementation itself is correct. The protocol design, we have formally proved it to be correct, the post-handshake one, but the implementation, we are under process of reviewing that and verifying that they have correctly implemented it. That's still ongoing.